All right, welcome back to the waiting room with Dr. SEC. At this time, we're going to go back to the Net Talk hotline, and we've got on the hotline with us now one of my favorite guests, Thomas Goldkamp from Gator Bait, part of the 247's Sports Network. Welcome to the show, Thomas.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's always great to have you on, and of course, big week, big game again for Florida, but I guess at this point in the season, every game is a big game, and let's just kind of go back a couple of weeks and kind of look at the resurgence of this Florida Gators team. They seem down and out. They're going in against a Georgia team that is about as hot as you can get at this point in the season, and absolutely dominate them, especially running the football. Made some changes that maybe at the time seemed a little bit controversial at the quarterback position. But now, after two straight SEC wins, everything appears to be on the right track again for the Gators.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable how much, a simple quarterback change has really kind of sparked this team, especially when you consider the fact that really Treon Harris didn't even do anything against Georgia. He only threw 6 passes. But I just think the change there, for whatever reason, really helped spark Florida. And they've been a completely different team offensively. And because of it, they're right there in the SEC race.
Absolutely. And, of course, this week's going to be very interesting because I guess at this point, I mean, it's happened a few times and it maybe doesn't seem like as big of a deal, but Steve Spurrier and the South Carolina Gamecocks are coming into town. And how big of a game is this for Will Muschamp? We know that they're talking about waiting to after the season. I thought, in my mind, he had to beat Georgia. But a win against South Carolina, does that put him in a lot better standing than he was?
Yeah, there's no question that a win this weekend would really help firm things up a little bit for him. I still don't know if that percent get him back for another year. But like you said, I mean, he was one foot out the door already going into that Georgia game. There's no question that he had to win that one. But suddenly, everything has kind of turned around. It's a complete 180 for this Florida team, and they're playing hard for him, and the offense, which has always kind of been the struggle, is coming along. So if he can get a win over a South Carolina team that's kind of reeling in its own right, maybe you put together and Jeremy Foley a reason to think about bringing him back for another year.
Absolutely. Looking at this team, because I think it's obvious what you're saying is very true. These players seem to, as much, it's hard to find a whole lot of fans that liked them a few weeks ago, and it's still not the easiest task in the world. I think a lot of them still kind of want to move on, and they're ready to change the chapter. But overall, what's important is that the players are the ones that want to play for them, and they're playing really hard right now. I've been really impressed with the way they played. It's never easy. I know Vanderbilt's not a very good football team this year, but it's never easy to go into national and just win games. I mean, they've been very competitive there over the last 3 or 4 years in particular, but they've been able to do that. But this Florida team as a whole, with Treon Harris now at quarterback, with some of the weapons starting to emerge in the running game, I mean, really that's been where it is. Has it been something just as simple as a spark from a quarterback who really isn't throwing the ball all that much?
Yeah, I mean, when you kind of boil everything down, there's really not a whole lot else to point to. Players have had the chance to play for Will Muschamp's job in the past, and that never really seemed to spark anything. For whatever reason, this team just did not play as well with Jeff Driscoll at quarterback. And, some guys just have that about them that they make everybody around them play better. The receivers look a lot better with Treon Harrison. I don't know, if that's a touch thing where he's putting a little bit better touch than Driscoll did, but just the whole team plays a lot better when he's in the game. And, it's one of those intangible things that's kind of hard to put your finger on. But, man, they put him in, and suddenly it's like a light switch on him.
Absolutely, and without a doubt, they're going to need some offense this week because they're going against a South Carolina team who is not very good right now. I mean, I know they've had a lot of mishaps along the way, but the reality is that this team, if you take away the Texas A&M game, they beat a good East Carolina team, they beat a good Georgia team. They collapsed against Missouri but only lost by 1 point. Collapsed against Kentucky, only lost by a touchdown. Almost beat Auburn, only lost by a touchdown. Collapsed against Tennessee. I mean, this team, even though on paper their record isn't very good, they're really only 5 or 6 plays away from being a team that's right there at the top of the East.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be a tough game for Florida. I think the number one thing, probably the number one reason for Florida's success so far is that it's been able to kind of keep the game within hand. You know, they went down early against Vanderbilt and Georgia, but it never spiraled out of control to where Treon Harris was forced to kind of make plays in the passing game. He's been able to kind of develop at his own pace, you know, with the running game really kind of working. And in South Carolina, you know, if they're a team that's capable of scoring, and if they can come out and hang some points on the board early, then maybe you can kind of dictate how Florida has to play and really put him in a situation that he hasn't been in yet.
Absolutely. And talking about that offense, it's been very good this season. I mean, you look just over the last 4 games, they're 1-3 in those games, but they've scored 38, 41, 35, and 42. I mean, that's a good offense. The defense, though, has been very, very shaky. We knew that secondary was going to be shaky going into the season with so many, young players and freshmen in the back end of that defense. Do you think this is a time that maybe they kind of, and they did last week, but even more so, kind of let Treon Harris throw the ball a little bit more?
Well, I think he's going to have to. I mean, you mentioned it. South Carolina is a team that can score some points, so you're going to need a little bit more in the passing game this week. But I still don't think Florida's going to get away from this work. I think they're going to try to pound the running game and kind of establish that first and really rely on that defense to keep them in the game early. Because the one thing Florida doesn't want to do is get in a situation where it has to drop back and it has to pass to be able to win the game. So I think you stick with what's working. You ride the run game pretty hard, count on your defense, and hopefully they put you in similar situations as, you know, they've been in the last 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked about the Florida season. It's been up and down so far, and they're hoping to finish with an up. And I want to ask you on the recruiting standpoint, how has this affected recruiting? Is recruiting about the same, or are the players sticking by it, or is it kind of wait and see, or are they still bought in that Will Muschamp's going to be there?
Yeah, you know, there's no question right now that Florida is in kind of a holding pattern in recruiting. They're ranked dead last in the SEC, even below Vanderbilt. So there's just not any momentum right now. There's a lot of negativity, obviously, you know, that's being pitched against Florida. You know, Will Muschamp might not even be back, that kind of thing. So really, until I think Jeremy Foley comes out and says one way or another if he's back or if he's fired, it's going to be hard to see Florida putting together much in the recruiting trail. Just kind of a wait and see mode at this point.
It's kind of strange though if you look at it. I know, you know, there was the Alabama game and there was the LSU game, which really shouldn't have lost. So we know how that went, and then just the Missouri game, one of the worst games to watch in recent memory, I'm sure, for Florida fans. But if you look at it, we know they can beat South Carolina. I think they're favored by a touchdown. East Carolina, they should win. And then Florida State. And what happens? I mean, this Florida State team hasn't been real good, and I know it's still a long shot, but if Florida goes in and beats this Florida State team somehow, some way, then all of a sudden, all the negativity of the past kind of goes away real quickly, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If Florida wins out this year with a win over, you know, Florida State, things are really going to turn around. You know, if that happens, I really don't see any way you don't give Will Muschamp another year. And once you do that, you know, you've got some things to sell. You can kind of, you know, I hate to say this for Jeff Driscoll, but you can kind of pin the blame on him a little bit and say, look, we were handicapped, and you know, now that we've got a quarterback, you know, we've got an offense that can score points and move the ball, and suddenly recruiting, you know, takes a huge uptick.
Absolutely. All right, let's look at this South Carolina-Florida game. One last thing. Appreciate so much you taking some time and being with us. If I was asked something Florida's got to do to win this football game, what would it be?
I think the number one thing is probably avoid turnovers because you know that South Carolina can score points, and so you really got to limit the amount of chances that they have. Florida will have a chance as long as it hangs onto the ball and plays safe. That defense, you know, is going to be tested some, but it's a pretty solid unit. And so Florida really just has to avoid giving South Carolina extra chances.
Absolutely, and I'm really interested to see. We've seen kind of one bad game out of the secondary for Florida, which was really bad against Alabama, where Amari Cooper was just kind of sprung open out of nowhere. But they got quite a task this week. You know, South Carolina has 3 really good receivers in Pharaoh Cooper, Nick Jones, and Shaq Rowland. You know, we know about Vernon Hargraves. We know some of the guys they have the back end. Is that a big matchup? Do you think if they can just slow those guys down that Florida's going to win this game?
Yeah, I think so. The one thing you don't want to see if you're Florida is South Carolina getting an easy touchdown by, you know, with a coverage bust. And Florida hasn't had as many of those lately, but like you said, they haven't really been tested a whole lot since then. And if South Carolina is able to strike on a couple of those quickly, suddenly the confidence starts to get a little bit rattled, and maybe Florida kind of falls back into that mode where, they're pressing a little too much.
Absolutely. Once again, we're talking to Thomas Goldkamp of 247 Sports, more specifically, with there at the Gator Bait. You tell our listeners how they can get there and how they can read some of the articles that you put out?
Absolutely. You can find us on the web at florida.247sports.com or gatorbait.net. And obviously you can follow me on Twitter. It's Goldkamp247.
Absolutely. I want to encourage our listeners once again to go to the site. Unbelievable amount of material. I go in there and check in all the time. But Thomas Goldkamp, follow him on Twitter at Goldkamp, which is Goldkamp 247, and does a fantastic job. I follow him on Twitter, always get my best Florida information from him. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.